The hotel manager glared at them, his voice cold and dismissive. "There are no rooms," he said, ignoring their reservation. As onlookers stared in silence, James clenched his fists, while Rachel calmly replied, "We'll be back, and you'll regret this." What happened next would shake the entire hotel to its core. Let's start from the beginning. James and Rachel Harrison stepped into the grand lobby of the Golden Crest, their polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. The scent of fresh-cut flowers filled the air, and the golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over the ornate interior. Their professional demeanor and sharp attire matched the elegance of the space, yet it was clear from the moment Mr. Richards, the hotel manager, laid eyes on them that something was off. He approached them with measured steps, his expression already void of the welcoming attitude expected from someone in his position. "We're sorry, but there are no rooms available," he said curtly, his tone sharp enough to slice through the cordial atmosphere. Rachel, ever composed, reached into her leather bag and produced a printed confirmation email. "We booked a room a month ago," she said, her voice steady, extending the paper toward him. Mr. Richards didn't even glance at the document. Instead, his lips tightened into a thin line, and he repeated, "I said there are no rooms." His dismissive tone carried an air of finality, as if he dared them to question him further. The tension between the three was palpable. Nearby guests had paused to observe the interaction. An elderly woman sitting by the lobby's fireplace leaned toward her husband, whispering, "How disrespectful." The murmur spread through the room like a ripple. James's jaw tightened as his fists clenched at his sides. It was clear he was holding back words that might escalate the situation. Rachel, noticing his restrained anger, placed a calming hand on his arm. With a quick nod, she signaled that they would not make a scene. Not here, not now. "We'll handle this later," Rachel said firmly, her voice low but resolute. Turning on her heel, she guided James toward the revolving doors, leaving behind a silent but charged atmosphere in the lobby. The other guests exchanged glances, some whispering amongst themselves, as the tension hung in the air long after James and Rachel stepped out. The manager's cold indifference had not gone unnoticed, and neither had the Harrisons' restrained but unwavering determination. James and Rachel sat at a corner table in a quiet cafe, the soft hum of conversations and clinking coffee cups surrounding them. The dim light from the hanging lamps cast a warm glow, but it did little to soften the cold knot of frustration tightening in James's chest. He stared into his untouched cup of coffee, his expression grim. "I thought we were past this decades ago," he said bitterly, his voice heavy with disappointment. His fingers drummed against the edge of the table as he shook his head. Rachel, sitting across from him, watched him silently for a moment before leaning forward. Her face, though calm, held a sharp determination in her eyes. "We can't let this slide," she said, her voice firm but measured. "It wasn't just about us, James. People like that man, they think they can get away with this because no one challenges them." James sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "It's exhausting," he admitted, "having to prove, again and again, that we deserve basic respect." Rachel placed her hand on his, her tone softening just slightly. "I know," she said, "but we're not just anyone, James. We have the power to hold him accountable, not just for us, but for everyone who's been treated like this. It's our responsibility to act." James looked at her, her quiet determination cutting through his bitterness. Slowly, he nodded. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Mr. Richards carried on as though nothing had happened. Behind the polished front desk, he issued orders to staff, checked in guests, and avoided the occasional sidelong glances from those who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. Unbeknownst to him, however, the consequences of his actions were already unfolding. A few guests who had been in the lobby during the incident began leaving detailed complaints on the hotel's review platform, their words sharp and direct. Unprofessional, disrespectful, and discriminatory appeared in their feedback. The ripples of dissatisfaction were spreading, though Mr. Richards, consumed by his routine, remained blissfully unaware of the storm quietly brewing around him.
The next morning, James and Rachel entered the grand lobby of the Golden Crest once again. This time, their demeanor was even more composed, their expressions resolute. They weren't here as guests, but as official inspectors, and the weight of their roles was evident in every step they took. The same staff who had seen them leave the day before now watched with curious glances, sensing that something had shifted. Approaching the front desk, Rachel firmly stated, "We need to speak with the owner, Mr. Williams. It's urgent." Her tone left no room for argument, and within minutes they were ushered into a private office. Mr. Williams, a sharply dressed man in his late 50s, greeted them with a puzzled but professional air. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" he asked, gesturing for them to sit. Rachel and James exchanged a glance before revealing their identities as Secret Service inspectors. Rachel handed over a thick file containing detailed reports, written observations, and even screenshots of complaints from the hotel's review platform that had surfaced overnight. As Mr. Williams skimmed through the pages, his expression darkened. "This is unacceptable," he finally declared, his voice heavy with authority. His gaze lingered on a particularly damning guest complaint before he slammed the file shut. "This will not go unnoticed. I'll address this immediately." Within moments, Mr. Richards was summoned to the office. He entered with his usual air of arrogance, but it quickly faltered when he noticed the serious expressions around the room. "What's this about?" he asked, a faint edge of unease creeping into his voice. Mr. Williams wasted no time. "I've received multiple complaints about your behavior yesterday," he began, sliding the file across the desk. "Not only from our inspectors, but from other guests. Care to explain yourself?" Richard scoffed, his desperation barely masked by his indignation. "This is absurd! I've always treated all guests equally," he exclaimed, his voice rising. But as the evidence was laid out before him, detailed accounts, timestamps, and reviews, his confidence crumbled. His protests grew weaker, his demeanor defensive. The truth was irrefutable, and the weight of his actions was finally catching up to him. A week later, the homepage of the Golden Crest featured an unexpected statement that quickly caught the attention of guests, employees, and the wider public. The bold headline read, "An apology to our guests and a commitment to change." The message, signed personally by Mr. Williams, acknowledged the discriminatory actions that had taken place and expressed deep regret for the failure to uphold the values of hospitality and equality. In the statement, Mr. Williams declared that Mr. Richards was no longer employed by the hotel. He outlined a comprehensive plan for mandatory training programs aimed at educating staff on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and customer respect. The apology didn't attempt to make excuses but took full accountability, promising a better future for both employees and guests. As the statement circulated online, it quickly went viral. Social media platforms buzzed with reactions as users praised the hotel's transparency and, more importantly, the bravery of James and Rachel. Hashtags like #JusticeServed and #ChangeStarts here began trending, with thousands of people sharing their thoughts. Finally, someone stood up to this kind of behavior, one post read, receiving hundreds of likes. Others began sharing personal stories of discrimination they had faced in similar settings, further amplifying the importance of the issue. Comments flooded in, applauding James and Rachel for using their position to make a real difference. For James and Rachel, seeing the ripple effects of their actions brought a profound sense of accomplishment. As they sat together reading through the posts, Rachel remarked, This is bigger than us. It's about showing people that they don't have to accept injustice." James nodded, a small smile breaking through his usually serious expression. "We did what we set out to do," he said quietly. Their actions not only led to change within the hotel, but sparked a broader conversation about fairness and accountability in the hospitality industry. While the journey had been challenging, it was clear to both of them that their efforts had made an impact, proving that even in the face of discrimination, justice could prevail.